Once upon a time in the 12th century, two children climbed out of a pit and sauntered into a quiet English town. That's the history. The weird part is that these particular children could easily be confused with Shrek and Kermit the Frog because they had bright green skin. And that's why, today, we're going to take a look at how the mysterious green children of Woolpit have baffled historians. But before we break out a banjo and start singing the Rainbow Connection, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. Then head on down to the comments and let us know what other colorful stories you want to hear about. Okay, looks like we've got the green light, so here we go. Two mysteriously verdant children climbed out of a wolf pit and descended on Woolpit. It sounds like the beginning of a nursery rhyme, but according to one William of Newburgh, who is credited with the earliest account of the tale, it's a true story that happened during the reign of King Stephen, sometime between 1135 and 1154. According to William's Historia Rerum Anglicarum, which was written sometime around 1189, the pit had been dug as an animal trap, and the children were a boy and a girl wearing clothes of unusual color and an unknown material. But even more bizarre was that they were both bright green, and not with envy. Their skin pigment literally had a strange green tint. And since that was kind of freaky, the confused children were quickly apprehended by reapers working the fields and brought to the nearby village. That all seems straightforward enough, but for what it's worth, there's no mention of the event in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, which records details of English history up to the death of King Stephen in 1154. The Chronicle is full of stories about such weird events, basically making it the weird history of its day. So the failure to mention the green children has suggested to some that the event took place during the reign of Stephen's successor, Henry II. According to an historical record written by a Ralph of Coggeshall, the children were taken in by a wealthy landowner named Richard de Calne, who may have been a knight. It's hard to say because very little is known about Calne. After spending some time in Woolpit, the green girl eventually learned enough English to relay her and her brother's story. That story, which could easily pass for a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, or Wicked, was that the two came from a place called St. Martin's Land, a Christian nation where everything and everyone was bright green. The sun never shone, and the land was drenched in a perpetual misty twilight. She couldn't explain how she and her brother ended up in the East Suffolk village, but she did describe the sound of bells, which had entranced them and caused the children to lose track of time and location. One minute they were tending their flock and listening to bells. The next, they were in the Woolpit crop fields. Some accounts also note that the children traveled through some sort of cavern to reach Woolpit and were overwhelmed by the sunlight on the other side. While the girl could not place her homeland relative to Woolpit's location, the young She-Hulk claimed that it contained a considerable river, across which the inhabitants could see a bright land, which both William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall assumed was the area around Woolpit. As for where St. Martin's Land was located, well, that was anyone's guess. Some suggested it was another planet, or an underground world in the center of the Earth, while the less imaginative assumed it was just another village in England, or maybe Western Europe. In 1998, Paul Harris published an elaborate theory that suggested the children lived in or near the English village of Fornham St. Martin. For one, the name sounds like a dead giveaway. It's also just a few miles from Woolpit, and the two towns were separated by a river, albeit one much smaller than the girl described. That part seems convincing enough, but Harris didn't really have anything compelling to explain the bells or the tunnel, so take it for what you will. Anyway, after the children were taken in by the good people of Woolpit, they were offered many different types of food. However, the starving kids, who had apparently never been informed that beggars can't be choosers, seemed to have some very discerning tastes. Everything they were offered repulsed them. Everything, that is, except raw beanstalks, which were unfamiliar to them, which we should mention are also green. For months after that, those beanstalks were the only thing the children would eat. Of course, we've been burying the lead on the most extraordinary part of this puzzle, which is, why in the name of all that's good and holy did these kids have green skin? It's a question that has been speculated over quite a bit since the children were initially discovered, But frustratingly, there still isn't much in the way of a satisfying explanation. The 12th century populace of Woolpit jumped to the conclusion the kids were probably fairies, which were commonly accepted as real back then. Fairies were imagined to be supernatural beings who looked mostly human as far as appearance goes, and the children's account of St. Martin Land did make it sound like the kind of place fairies would hang out. Fairies were a real concern back then, due to the belief that a human could be trapped in the fairy world for all eternity, though this situation would obviously be the flip side of that. Of course, not everyone bought the whole fairy thing. In a 1621 book, The Anatomy of Melancholy, author Robert Burton was pretty adamant the kids were aliens, saying the children likely fell from the heavens from a planet where the sun never shone. Other analyses of the incident, such as that of Scottish author-astronomer Duncan Lunan, agreed. According to him, the children probably did not arrive in a flying saucer, but had the means to be instantaneously transported to our world directly from their own. Green-skinned creatures with beaming technology? Any other Star Trek fans thinking these kids were young Orions? One theory about the lime-colored kitties ties in with a 16th century folktale, The Babes in the Wood, a story which would later be adapted into Hansel and Gretel. In the story, two young orphans are taken in by their uncle, who then plots to kill them and steal their inheritance. In one early version, he plans to poison them with arsenic, which some believe accounts for the green skin. Those believers, however, are probably wrong, because while arsenic can darken your skin, it does not make you green. Another theory notes that the children were near starvation when they were discovered, and postulates that their refusal to eat anything but raw beans suggests they were probably suffering from hypochromic anemia, also known as chlorosis. This condition is caused by a poor diet that affects the color of red blood cells and can result in a noticeably green shade of skin. Whatever the cause of the green pigmentation, the accounts of William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall say that both children, or at least the girl, eventually lost the green hue after they started eating more than just beans. That being said, neither Billy Boy nor Ralphie Boy was an actual eyewitness to the events, so for all we know, those kids could still be green to this day. As you may have noticed, immigrants often have it tough. Even in the past, and the 11th and 12th centuries were a time of heavy immigration for the Flemish people who traveled to England from northern Belgium. If the children happened to be among those immigrants, it might explain how they ended up alone. Many Flemish people were taken out by Henry II's troops during a battle at Fornham St. Martin in 1173. Those troops typically just targeted other troops, while ordinary citizens were often left alone. But there are always exceptions. If that's the case, it is possible the unfamiliar language the children spoke was Flemish. Due to the aforementioned mass immigration, however, it seems unlikely that absolutely no one in Woolp would have recognized it. Yes, Woolpit was a fairly small village, but it was just a few miles shy from the well-populated market town of Bury St. Edmunds. The network of roads and other paths that connect various villages and towns to the region would have brought foot traffic to Woolpit at the time, with people from all over speaking all varieties of language. If the strange language wasn't Flemish, however, it may just have been a dialect of English that was unfamiliar to the people of Woolpit. Around the 12th century, there were several different dialects spoken throughout England, depending on which region of the country someone came from. So it's at least possible the kids weren't from around those parts, and it's just that nobody from Woolpit recognized their dialect. Both William of Newburgh's and Ralph of Coggeshall's versions of the story state that the girl survived into adulthood, but they disagree on how long the boy lived. In Billy Newburgh's version of events, the boy passes away shortly after he and his sister are baptized, so we may be dealing with some sort of an omen situation here. Newburgh also claims that when the girl grew up, she got married, after which she lived for some time. But that's all he says. In Ralph of Coggeshall's version, however, the boy did not adapt well to living in Woolpit, was always languid and depressed, passing away before the two could be baptized. The girl, according to Ralph, grew up loose and wanton in her conduct, which strikes us as pretty judgmental on Ralph's part. But since he's dead, we're gonna let it slide. The aforementioned Duncan Lunan did some research into the genealogy of Richard de Calne and found a record from 1197, which may indicate that the girl took the name Agnes and married a justice, clergyman, and scholar named Richard Barr, who was a servant to Henry II. Lunan's claim is based on his discovery of a petition for land that featured names and dates he believes may be related to the Green Children. While no last names were given, nor any source of the inheritance, it is believed that the petition was from Richard de Calne's son, Walter, who did have a daughter named in the record. If Lunan is correct, it means Green Agnes would have grown up into a non-green adult woman and lived a life with a prominent husband. However, research by author John Clark points out there's no evidence the record is connected to anyone involved in the Green Children story. There also isn't a lot of direct evidence that de Calne ever knew anyone named Agnes, or that her alleged husband, Richard Barr, ever married anyone with that name. So while it is generally agreed the girl grew up and married, the rest of the story merits more of a red flag than a green light. So, what do you think? And do you have your own theories about what happened? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Weird History.